Um, yeah, Yessica Fernandez is an agricultural economist by profession. She comes from a farming family in central Mexico where corn, squash, beans, and maguey are grown. She has grown manzano chili peppers in greenhouses and maguey plants in the center of Mexico. Faced with an oversupply of pulque in her community and the loss of maguey fields, she decided to focus her studies on analyzing what new products could be developed from pulque and aguamiel or agave nectar from pulque agaves. She has more than 15 years of experience as an agricultural extension advisor in Mexico and holds a PhD in agricultural economics. She currently works as a project scientist at the Water Management Lab and is participating in agave production projects in California. Thank you, Jessica. And
Oh, thank you.
you can go ahead.
Okay. Oh, thank you for coming on Sunday morning. That is a really hard, but we are here. Thank you for coming. And I will talk about what is the very important aspect that you should consider before deciding to grow this novel plant. So, agave is native to North America and some countries in Central America. For that is considered the land of agaves or agave land, as described by the father of agave, Howard Scott Gentry. This area in the past was known like Mesoamerica, America, and Aridoamerica, and the people that live in this territory share knowledge on many topics, and they domesticate and cultivate many species. Among that this plant, agave appears. During the colonial era in Mexico, exchange of plants and agave intensified from Mexico to Europe by the Spanish in the 17th century, which is why we now find agaves in many different latitudes around the world. Agave is considered a very drought-tolerant plant that is prosper even in poor soil and has low nutritional requirements compared to the other crops. Why? Because it has a granulation acid metabolism. What this means? That it fixes carbon at night and releases carbon dioxide during the day, but with the stomach closed, allowing to transpire less than the other plants. It's like a very important scientific about agave says, Dr. Joan, agave plants are like a camels because they are able to store water in their succulent leaves or pencas. Agave requires more or less water than the other crops for this metabolism. Some research say that the usage is between 60 and 80% less water than the other crops to generate the same amount of biomass. But in my opinion, to cultivate any crop, we must consider four fundamental aspects. The first one is the climatic conditions, the agribusiness model, the agricultural management, and the species selections. However, we will focus on agave. This talk is about what species we need to select for different climates. In agave land exist a lot of different kinds of climates and soils. What it does mean that we have different species for different climates. So, although agave is very resilient plant, not all the species tolerant a lot cold, too much sun, or excess or water. And here we can see some peaks about the damage that this condition provoke to the plant. For example, frost damage to the agave pencas or the agave stalks initially manifests as visible burns. After a few days, these burn areas begin to decompose, and this process attracts insects and promotes the development of fungi. Therefore, a poorly managed frost not only causes direct physical damage, but can also be a starting point to serious sanitary problems with your land. And for example, this is a pitch that what happened with the excess of water. What happened? The roots the roots, and that killing the plant. The other problem, it is the excess heat sherbets. The leaves and completely dried and out the plant. For that reason, it is very important to identify the minimum and maximum temperature in your farm, the frost risk assessment, the annual precipitation patterns, and the extreme heat events, and select the adequate species in order to avoid these problems. But with agave, like other different crops, the soil is very important. Why? Because the soil is a box where we store resources. And this is the most important resources that we farmers have. We have minerals, we have organic matter, we have air, we have water, and we have living organisms. A very natural advantage that we have with agave is that they can prosper in poor soil. But there is one thing that agave don't like, and is that waterlogged soil. Therefore, if your soil has his characteristic, it is very recommendable to plant on a terrace or in borders in order to avoid this problem. So, agave has a phytoremediation capacity. For that reason, the soil can improve after planting agave. Now I want to talking about what is the agrobusiness model. An agrobusiness model is the way in which my product generates value. And value is not only measured in economic terms. For example, in the case of agave, we need to measure the agroclimatic benefit that the agave incorporates to the land. But if we are developing a business activity, the project must necessarily generate economic value in order to be viable. A business model defines how I create value, how I structure my cost, how I set my prices, and how I communicate and deliver the value to my customers. In the case of the agave, the selection of a species is very important because we have different agave for different byproducts. For example, we have agave pulqueros, we have agave for produce tequila or mezcal or alcohol beverage. We have plants of agave for produce fibers. We have agaves for ornamental uses, and we have adequate agaves for produce biofuels or for produce bioactive compost for diverse industrial applications. However, the profitability of agave does not depend only of the main product. That is very important because the profitability is closely associated with circular economy because it's important to use the entire plant in this agribusiness model. Why? Because the entire plant is higher compounds of biomass and sugar. And for that reasons, these models are very connected with the circular economy. The agave have more than 100 uses documented, but I think, in my experience, that the future for these plants are in produce inulin, in produce agave syrup, in produce alcohol or agave spirits. The other one is for produce bioethanol and for like the raw material for the food and cosmetic industry. In these different models, I estimate the approximate investment that required to process agave into various byproducts, and the investment since the $120,000 to $800,000, all in a small scale. The creation and consolidation of adequate infrastructure is essential for development of these business models. Much of this infrastructure consists of commonly used of equipment that can be used for multiple productive applications. However, the production chain is not yet fully articulated, and the associate market remained incipient at limited scale now in California. Not only in California, in Mexico, the most important facility is for produce alcohol only. Nevertheless, considering current market conditions and new consumer trends toward more responsible and sustainable practice, the development of this sector has high potential for growth and consolidation in the medium and the long term. The creation of this infrastructure has high opportunity through cooperatives with access for small farmers. In order to know more about what is the profitability for produce agaves in California, I developed an economic model to produce agaves pulqueros, and the assumptions of the model was developed for 1 acre, considering regenerative management and only 3 months of irrigation, followed only by dry farming in 1 acre of agave salmiana for produce agave sap, agave pulque, and then you can distill it. And the plant begins with the offsprings or hijuelos of 12 inches. We need 8 years for harvest. And I consider 4 models, meaning that the farmer decides in what processing level can participate. For example, the first model is agricultural production. In this model, the main product that you can obtain is the plant ready to harvest, what you need to sell to other one to harvest and to use for other byproducts. The unit cost that I calculate was near to $140. The yield in 1 acre you can obtain 428 plants, and the forecasting price that I use for do this analysis is for $270 per plant. And for example, in the case of the agave sap or aguamiel, that is like very sweety water that you can obtain from agaves pulqueros, the cost of production for every liter of aguamiel is more than $1, but the yield that you can obtain in 1 acre of agaves is the 385,200 of agave sap. And the cost of production that we use for make this analysis is like $2 per liter. In the other case, if you decide to sell pulque, that is, as you know, is assumption, the cost of production for pulque is almost $3. You can obtain 264,247 liters of pulque, and we use the forecast price like $30-50. The model that incorporate all the different steps for obtain agave distillation is this one. And for example, in this model, we obtain the cost of production of $40 per bottle. And in 1 acre of production, you can obtain 35,900 bottles of agave spirits. And we use the forecast price of $60 per bottle. This is one model using the production of agave pulqueros, but we have other way to produce alcohol beverage. That is the way that used for produce pulque, for produce tequila or for produce mezcal, but it's different. In each business model, the revenue calculation includes the sale of offsprings and leaves because they represent a valuable biomass. However, markets and processing infrastructure still need to be developed to fully capture this value. In the farm, for example, the pencas you can use for obtain biofertilize or for produce silage for animals. So the other important aspect that we need to consider for select the adequate species is the agricultural management, because the business model is the type of agricultural management under which the plantation will be carried out. And it can be organic, agroecological, regenerative, conventional, or transitional. And you know, the organic agriculture, the main idea is the change of inputs. In agroecological agriculture, is the change of the system, totally change the system. In the transitional model, combines conventional practice with sustainable practice, with sustainable strategies. Reduce but not eliminate the use of synthetic inputs as is the intermediate step toward to sustainability. In the other case, we have a conventional agriculture that we have the high use of agrochemical inputs, level use of mechanization and technological intensification, and is more focused on productivity and scale. And regenerative agriculture. That is the main idea of this system is restoration on ideological functions, mainly to the soil regeneration, recovery of ecosystem service, and enhancement of resilience. The different agricultural management that you select, we have different use of inputs, different level use of mechanization or labor, use cover crops or not, soil and natural resources, and that implies long-term costs of my farm or less cost to my farm. So in the case of agave, the agave management system has been based on land-based production models because we need to give the time to the plant to develop and absorb all the smells and flavor of its environment. This has not been respected in the tequila production change model. leading to a loss of value in the product due to the excessive use of agrochemicals, maturation agents, and chemical fertilizers. That is why I promote models such as Ametepantle, which allows that the agave to grow its own in peace and you can obtain other different products. The Metepantle is a concept of pre-Spanish cultures, which consists of growing rows of maguey or agave interspersed with other plantations, such as a fruit, trees, corn, beans, squash, barley, cempasúchil or flowers, and quelites. And finally, I want to talk about the selection of agave species. These recommendations I give you based on my empirical knowledge and combined with my experience as a research and agave grower in Mexico. Because an inadequate species selection will lead to delayed optimal development to the plant, limited sugar and biomass production, increase the irrigation requirements to the plant, and greater input demands, higher labor requirements, and also you can alter the physiology adaptation to the plant. One recommendation that is very easy for me is that always check the hardness or turgidity of the stalk of the penca, as this will give you an important clue to the agave ability to tolerate sudden temperature variation. Because, for example, it's not the same the turgidity of the agave pari to agave tequilana, o agave salmiana, o agave utahensis, o agave deserti. And for example, in California, we have 4 native agave. That is agave americana, agave deserti, agave shawi, and agave utahensis. In this list, which I leave as a reference material, I include some species that I have experienced handled, but remember that we have more than 2,400 species of agave. So I recommend that first identify the species you have and research more about the native climates that where it grows. And for example, with agave marmorata, I consider that has a moderate tolerance capacity. Agave maximiliana low, agave pari is high, agave potatorum is low and moderate, agave rodacantha is moderate, agave salmiana is moderate but high, agave shawi high capacity to tolerate frost events. And in this list, you can see the temperatures, the different uses that you can obtain. And so what is the sensitivity that the plant has for different temperatures? And the other one is that you can see the turgor and the thickness of the agave stalk. And finally, I want to invite you to professional agave course that is starting this weekend, this week. And so thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to write an email or by the Instagram of their other resources. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Yessica. Just want to tell everybody, if you have any questions, you can put it in the comments section, and we will have time at the end to go over each of the questions. Yes, next I want to introduce Steve Sanchez, and he'll be talking a little bit about traditional ecological knowledge, pest management. Steve is a farmer and consultant and farms both agave and cactus in Northeast Los Angeles County and in the Western Mojave Desert. Steve, I'll let you take it away.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Um, Thanks for being here today so you could talk about agave with all of us. If you got any questions, definitely put them in the chat and I'll get to them, or I'm sure Adam or Yessica can answer them as well. So really today I wanted to talk about three short topics and dive into them a little bit, but the first one's going to be kind of just what agave species I'm seeing prospering in California, what I'm planting. The second topic's going to be, on pest management, really having to do with agave saponins. And the third topic is going to be on traditional ecological knowledge, surrounding agave, mainly in the United States. But, as Yessica was talking about, it's a plant that from California to Florida, from, the north to the tip of South America. So there's many traditional communities, countries that talk about them all in such a short time, but I, would encourage everyone to explore a lot of these different cultures that grew agave in the Americas, because there's a lot to learn from all of them. But yeah, so the first thing I wanted to go into is, the agave that I'm planting here in California. Some advice that I would give to a client. I'm a consultant here in California, and I grow a lot of different agave through my nursery and through my farm. So, just these general advices will help any farm out, regardless of where they're at. But the first one is going to be, when you're selecting your own agave, you want to guys or what local genetics the most, and local really to mean native. So, for example, when I'm in local, I'm saying go around nursery, we count and see what are people. So through those two, you can start to find genetics that have lived already several generations in California, and then you're going to be able to, oh, sorry, yeah, there. I'm in the desert, so sometimes it does, get a little choppy, but you'll be able to prioritize these genetics over anything else, because they're already something that is developed in the area, and they're already something that is going to be prospering in that area. So it's easier to go off of the work that people have done already and utilize those crops instead of bringing in, for instance, agave from other countries. So a lot of people import seed from, let me see. Yeah, definitely I can. So, the seed quality, sometimes coming in from Europe or from Mexico, are accustomed to essentially the areas that people are already growing in, and that can, make it difficult for us to propagate these species as well, right? So, another thing, after gathering local genetics from different nurseries or from different gardens that you might find, I would advise to, start propagating and seeding your own agave, mainly trying to hybridize and select cultivars. So cultivars, for instance, when you see different agave, you're going to have lots of different agave that are different styles or forms of the same type. And each one of those could, present different characteristics, right? So, and then through hybridizing, for instance, you can take an agave that may be more cold tolerant, mixing it with an agave that may be, for instance, a larger size. So many of the more cold tolerant agaves aren't as small, and or as large. So you have cold, smaller agaves, and you have larger, more less cold hardy agaves. And by hybridizing some of them, you can combine traits and have, for instance, a larger size cold hardy agave. So, that's also why it's great to mix in native genetics, right? So some of the largest agave that are native to the United States, for instance, are from Texas, right? So agave chrysantha, agave havardiana, they're pretty wide agaves that are also very cold tolerant. And, I'm trying to prioritize some of that hybridization as well, bringing in different agaves such as agave puri, neo mexicana, and agave havardiana, which may have cold tolerances, for instance, down to -20 or -30 Fahrenheit, and combining them with, more cultivated agaves, such as different cultivars of angustifolia that necessarily, wouldn't live out in the desert or anywhere cold in the Southwest. So, I try to tell my clients and lots of people in California that, in a small farm or a large farm, I think it's really important to have a balance of size, of the agaves that you're planting at. So, for instance, you may plant some that are, 6 months old, some that are a year old, some that are 2 years old, so that you're essentially having a varying maturity rate, and you can have different timing of markets, right? So, for instance, if everybody plants at one time agave like we are today in California, they're pretty much gonna many of the species mature at similar rates because people are planting similar times and similar species. So if you're varying different ages that you're planting, different species, and it has different maturity rates in between all of these agave, you may have or you may get to a process that I've called, continual harvesting. So, for instance, I'm planting every 3 to 6 months, and I always actually have agave that I'm harvesting now after several years, every 3 to 6 months. So, instead of waiting, for instance, from 7 to a 15-year harvest, if you stagger the different species, the different ages, and different cultivars, even within the different species, then you can have lots of different rates of maturity, which, as I mentioned, may be great for economic factors because, for instance, in Mexico right now, the agave is at such a low price that if it is your time to harvest, you may be going bankrupt or you may be making no money, right? So if you are able to, for instance, have a harvest a few years out from when the majority is, then you may be actually hitting the peak of the market, which many agave farmers in Mexico did, only 2-3 years ago, right? So the peak and the valley may be only 2 to 3 years. And if you can, stagger your agave out over several years, then, you're not going to be subject to market changes as quickly as most farms have been in the past. But, some of the agaves that I have really prospering for me, I'll just mention really quickly. And all of these agaves, for the most part, I've grown out in quantities over 10,000. So I've had like a lot of experience with them, as far as, seeing like their cold, heat, wind, hardiness, as well as speed of growth. But agave vilmoreana is a quick, fast-growing species, very drought tolerant and cold hardy. Agave americana and different cultivars. So a lot of people complain about a large agave americana and it taking a long time. I would recommend subspecies Medio Picta alba. Usually has a 5 to 6 year maturity rate instead of what could be 12 to 15 plus for the larger agave americana, which is native to Texas. So different subspecies like Medio Picta alba or lemon lime hybrid are going to be smaller, more manageable to harvest, and quicker maturity rates while still maintaining, the strengths of that native Texan agave americana, right? The drought tolerance, the cold hardiness, the wind hardiness, much to what Yessica was talking about, has those really tough leaves that, many agave may just within a few days dry out in some of these Mojave Desert, windstorms, right? So it's important to have agaves that are going to have tough leaves sometimes in deserts. And then, if you're looking for something similar to what a lot of people are farming in Mexico, I recommend, Angustifolia subspecies marginata, which has one of the largest ranges of an agave in Mexico. And this agave is going to be similar to what people use to create mezcal or tequila, which is mezcal, agave Angustifolia espadín, used for mezcal, or subspecies, of Angustifolia, which is tequiliana, cultivar Blue Weber, and that is used for tequiliana, right? So Angustifolia subspecies marginata is something that's grown in a lot of gardens in California, Texas, and around the U.S. And most people don't know it's basically very similar to the main cultivated species in Mexico, while being something that isn't really utilized but still produces a large piña, much like those that they use in Mexico. But the key difference here is that it's more cold hardy, more heat hardy, and wind hardy. So unlike Tequiliana and Espadín, which are the biggest cultivars grown in Mexico, we can't really grow that outside of coastal California. A lot of these Angustifolia marginata can not only go from California, they could go pretty much throughout the whole Southwest, and as well as, in the southeast of the country. So like Florida and surrounding states, right? So it has a very large range that it could be farmed in. And yeah, going off of different natives like agave havardiana and different agave Paris, you'll have something that's very cold and heat hardy as well. But now I wanted to get in a little bit into, what I've been studying a bit with agave saponins and how I'm using it for pest management. So essentially, saponins are a chemical that are within different species of agave. Most agave, from my understanding, have very small amounts of them, but some have larger quantities. Some of these agave may be agave vilmoreana, agave shadi, and agave nicknamed habali. And these are agaves that have traditionally been used by indigenous people from everything from cleaning to sanitization and washing. And I really got excited about these when I realized that some of my family had been using them for generations for pests, right? So what I realized from my grandpa that is really simple to do is how to create your own agave saponin chemical based like water essentially. And it's nothing really complicated. You're just cutting agave leaves, and much like if you've ever peeled aloe to throw in water and remove tannins so that you can consume it. This agave is basically you're cutting it off like with a potato peeler, the exterior of the leaf, and allowing that to soak for several days in water. And then you have a solution that it's saponin rich, water essentially. And you can use this saponin rich water for a extraordinary amount of uses. And some of those uses that I've been seeing is, minimizing and replacing basically synthetic chemicals on client farms, as well as, on my farm, we're no chemicals. So, we've been using this as a form of, biochemical, I guess you could say. So we've been using it on different insects, such as, agave weevil, agave mites, different insects that we might find, as well as different fungicide or fungus-based pest, right? And we've been also using it as a natural herbicide as well. So, for instance, by just applying different agaves that aren't high in saponin with a saponin-based, solution, you may need no use of herbicides, insecticides, pesticides, rodenticides, and it's really extraordinary thing that I'm realizing could be useful, because it's almost as if the solution for many of agave's problems is actually coming from the agave itself. But it's really simple to make your own solution, and it'll help make many small farms, I think, a little bit more independent, because as many of us know, the synthetic chemical industry, just the products alone is 10 billion in the United States. Now, if you include all contractors and companies behind synthetic chemicals, it's over 100 billion. So agave saponins, I think, should be researched and used a lot more. But having the ability to disrupt the $100 billion industry, and have something that is coming from nature instead of synthetically created, would be, I think, something really revolutionary and needs more exploration for sure. But the things that I've been exploring is obviously that these saponins are biodegradable, so they're not staying in soil, water, or affecting these soil, water, and air systems really. But I would also talk about what Yessi was preaching about a little bit here, which is that there's lots of different avenues to explore for economic use in with your agave, and if you grow agaves such as Agave Vilmoreana, that are high in saponins. I'm trying to partner with different universities for seeing how saponins can be applied into biomedical research. So, there's lots of research done on saponins already, and the fact that agaves have a lot of saponins, we really just need to like expand that research. So it's not like we're drawing from a blank board here. It's lots of really valuable stuff that saponins has been research for, and many of those things, I'll just list them real quick. It's like cholesterol management, immune system support, helping with metabolic regulation, and cardiovascular health, right? So a lot of these things, saponins can come from agave versus other plants, and that's something that California agave industry needs to explore as well as a potential economic revenue. But the last part here I wanted to talk about is now going into the traditional ecological knowledge from indigenous communities in the Americas, right? And a lot of different communities here grew agave. Just listing some of them really quickly that you can might explore for different knowledge are the ancestral Pueblo, the Hohokam, the Mogollon, the Sinagua, the Patayan. These are all from Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. Here in California, we had the Cahuilla, the Kumeyaay, the Killua, and the Pai Pai. These are all tribes that grew agave shawi, agave deserti, and there's lots to learn from these different tribes that all over the United States were growing these agave, right? One of the biggest things I think to learn from them is biodiversity, right? So agave was a huge part of their diets, a huge part of their culture, but it wasn't the only thing. It was also grown in combination with different nuts, cactus, yucca, everything. For instance, the other agaves such as manfredas or polyanthus, different acacia and palo verdes and mesquites, right? So essentially this biodiversity included agave, but it was not only agave that they were growing, right? So I think it's important to see that on our own farms and see how we can increase biodiversity. And that is going to allow you to have a lot more economical revenue, right? So for instance, the biggest crop that I grow alongside my agave is cactus, right? So cactus allows you to have a yearly crop, monthly crop that you can supplement your agave farm revenue while you're waiting for other crops to mature, right? So these indigenous can teach us to have biodiversity as far as plants, but that also will lead you to a diversity of products that you can make and revenue streams. So applied to today's knowledge, right? That's really important to see how they were doing it. But also the second biggest thing that they were, preaching is growing agave for your ecosystem and not trying to, change your ecosystem for your agave, right? So they were choosing different agave that, they could grow dry farmed with the water they had, with the nutrients they had, with the animals they had. They weren't trying to bring imported, plants from really far away. They were choosing something really close to them and just trying to improve on that. Much like I was saying, gather stuff from nurseries and try to, improve it. And ideally, over several generations, you have what I call a super agave that's basically attuned to your farm. And the third biggest thing that I think these tribes showed is that they were able to use the landscape to the benefit of the agave, right? So things that are problems for many farms, having a lot of rock, having a lot of hills, these turned into prosperous scenarios for these agave farmers in the Southwest, right? So they were able to use slopes and make them into terraces, use washouts to have large, clusters of agave and plants growing. rocks for piling, around agave and lowering evaporation and erosion, or increasing percolation and less runoff. So all of these things, became not issues for them. It actually helped them improve, right? So the last thing I'll say is that, agave has been used in the Americas for 9,000 years, right? It's been cultivated for over 5,000. And in the United States, there's at least over 2,000 years of use of it by various tribes. So, in a dry farmed system. So the biggest thing I think we can learn from these different tribes around the U.S. or Mexico is how sustainable their systems were to last for several thousands of years, right? Whereas, for instance, in Mexico today, you have a couple decades of industrial agave agriculture that's destroying the ecosystem, water systems, and people in general. So there's a lot more, I think, to learn from indigenous people in Mexico or the United States than from industrial farmers of today. And that's what I'll leave you guys with. If there's any questions you guys have, always definitely leave them in the chat or reach out to me personally. But there's a lot to learn about these indigenous communities and agave. So I'll just allow you to explore a little bit as well on your own.
Thank you so much, Steve. Such a wealth of knowledge. Everyone who RSVP'd will receive a follow-up on some of the resources that are available and contact information for our speakers if they do so, please too. And you can also see some of their contact information in the Small Farm Conference information section too. But next we have our speaker, Adam Goldberg, and I would like to introduce him. Adam and his wife, Lori, founded Stargazer Spirits in 2020 after planting their first 1-acre test plot on their Sonoma County farm. They now have nearly 7 acres planted to agave and over 10,000 plants with some 38 agave varieties focusing on genetic diversity, rare species, sustainability, ecological restoration, and the development of agaves uniquely suited to spirits production and the Northern California climate. Adam and Lori now have an agave nursery, Stargazer Nursery, where they share their agaves that are succeeding on their farm under a variety of challenging conditions. They have been featured in local, national, and international press coverage, and they are closely involved in the statewide development of an agave industry in California. Go ahead and take it away, Adam.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'll reiterate what the others say. We appreciate you showing up on a Sunday. I'll also say that there is not a ton of expertise statewide on sort of what's going on in California agave, and on this panel is a huge percentage of that expertise. And so I'm really excited to share the panel with Steve and Yessica, both of whom are doing really amazing work in this space and who we've worked with quite a bit in a number of capacities, both on a professional and a personal level. So with that, I want to talk today about what I call the ongoing California agave experiment. And the first question one might say is that why is it an experiment? As Steve just noted, there are thousands of years of cultivation of agave in the United States, let alone in Mexico and Central America. Here, if you see some photos of local agaves in our area in Sonoma County, on the left is the stables of the home of Mariano Vallejo, a very important figure, both as the founder of Sonoma, but also in the transition of California from a part of Mexico to an independent republic to a state of the United States. There are plantings of agave Americanas that have been there since the 19th century. In the bottom right-hand corner here, a series of agave Americanas. You have Medio Picta Alba, which Steve mentioned earlier, with the white center. You have a variegated lemon lime in the back. These are unirrigated, plantings in a park in San Francisco. At the top right, you have a variegated Desmetiana in someone's landscaping in Sonoma. These things are, these plants are just set it and forget it, right? You put them in the ground, they grow without much care. They're used to our climate. There's thousands of years of knowledge about them. It's easy, right? And the answer is it really is not. These plants are and can be challenging to grow. They're hyper localized in how they respond. We in Northern California, in wine country up here in Sonoma County, are at sort of the northernmost reach for many of the plants that we're growing. And part of our project, in line with what Steve is saying, is developing genetics that work for our farm, and that's a lot of what the experimentation is. So in my talk today, I'm going to focus on really some fundamental considerations that people should be thinking about as they think about an interest in growing agave. We'll start with the opportunity. I do think there's a great opportunity. I asked ChatGPT to create a photo for me of California Gold Rush. If rather than gold, agaves were what was being mined, and this is what ChatGPT came up with for me. I use this sort of tongue in cheek because although the percentage of land planted to agave in California is minuscule at present, there is a growing sense that there's tremendous economic opportunity in agave. And that comes from increasing U.S. demand for agave from spirits, beyond spirits, whether you're talking about biofuels or inulin production or ecological restoration. Agave agriculture does use considerably less water than many California crops, including especially nut trees or pomegranates. We find that our thirstiest agaves use around a quarter of the water that grapes use in our area. And it goes actually, we have agaves that are more efficient than that. Plant hardiness, adaptability. These plants are very hardy and they do adapt to local conditions. We have about 35 inches of rain a year on average, which is high. We also have much colder winters, and cold and wet is not something that agaves love, but we've been seeing adaptation. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity to develop new cultivars, both for site appropriateness and also visual and all sorts of features. I mean, there's whether you're breeding for sugars or colors, drought tolerance, cold tolerance. There's a lot of opportunity to improve the stock to be suited better to California. And there's a new industry that seems to be on the horizon. So it's an exciting time in agave. At the same time, there are a lot of challenges with these plants. They are not just put them in the ground and forget about them. Site conditions matter quite a bit. And there are hundreds of varieties of agave, so there's a lot to work with, but not everyone will be able to grow, for example, agave tequilana, blue Weber Azul, which is the plant used to make tequila in Mexico. It is one of the highest sugar agaves and is grown for its commercial utility. If you look at right here, it is a photograph from our farm in 2022 after 2 years of very balmy winters. We had a once in a 30-year snowstorm where snow stayed on the ground for 2 weeks and we lost a ton of plants. You have to be very realistic in looking at your site, what the soils are, what the air is, and in a whole host of different ways to figure out what plants you can choose, what plants you can build genetic wise. Life cycle is challenging. I mean, these are plants that don't reach maturity for at best 5-6 years, at sometimes 15, 20 years. There's a lot of information. Some of it's not accurate in terms of life cycle, and a lot of it will depend on where you're growing. But if you're waiting on your plant to mature for 15 years before you can harvest it, one time and then it's dead, that creates some economic concerns and just challenges in keeping them alive. Hyper local performance. This is something that's been very interesting for us to see. Plants do well for us that don't do well elsewhere. Plants that seem to be growing well on the valley floor, we're about 1,200 to 1,800 feet above sea level. Plants that do well on the valley floor sometimes don't do well, just a few miles away. So that localization is really important when thinking about your site conditions. Pest pressure. We have tons of gophers and deer who really like to go after our agaves. There's limited California-specific expertise, although it's growing. Ethical sourcing is a consideration. It's important to know where your plants are coming from. Plants and seeds do come out of Mexico in ways that are not legal. Depending on how they're sourced, may be unethical. There's a lot of plant material in California, though, already that has been for decades, if not centuries. So there are ways to get agave in ethical ways, but you want to be thinking about that. And then, as I mentioned, economic uncertainty. The market for many of these uses is still yet to be defined, and there's a considerable need for experimentation. Oops. So let's talk about some of these considerations. We only have 20 minutes, so I'll try to keep it relatively short. This is a subject I could talk about for hours on end. This is one of our blocks where we have a few acres planted. It was an ancient riverbed before there was some ancient volcanic activity. So you can see to the right here, we have compressed volcanic ash. We have very thin soils here. And what has worked here is much different than what has worked here, which is another block at a different part of our farm where we have far deeper soils that are heavy in clay and retain significant water in the winter, although they're hydrophobic in the summer. So you want to be very focused on temperature, on humidity, precipitation. Altitude makes some difference, although generally where we're growing these plants in California is going to be lower in altitude than where maybe their native habitat is, although not always. Some plants that grow well at high altitude in their native habitat grow really well at lower altitude. Plants that require very little water can handle a lot of water, but it's going to require some specific experimentation at your sites. Soil type and depth. We're seeing in the Central Valley where they have far deeper, looser soils, much faster maturity. Where we are, where our soils are denser, shallower, we have poorer nutrient levels. pH is important. Agaves seem to like acidity, but not too much acidity. Organic matter. In other words, these are all very standard considerations. If you're already farming, if you're already thinking about how to optimize your soil through whatever methods you're doing and your conditions to optimize your plants, but many people don't realize you need to do the same for agave. You don't just throw it in the ground and forget about it. So what are some considerations with plant selection? Here, I think it's very important to understand your goals before you get started with agave. Are you thinking about planting, a unique planting to make a unique artisanal spirit? We have some 38 varieties of agave. We're planting into our native habitat. We're not ripping. We're not clearing ground. Ultimately, we're planting on relatively steep slopes, which makes it challenging to use mechanization. So what limits do you have from that? What abilities do you have from that? Are you going to be doing vertical processing? Are you thinking about what you want to sell to distillers, for example? Certain plants are going to be more commercially viable than others. Are you growing for landscaping? Your goals will in significant part define what plants you should be thinking about. Your site conditions, soil preferences. By that, I mean, for the agave, we have some agaves that do quite well in clay. We have others that really need sandier soil. You want to think about nutrition needs. Nutrition, agave, as Yessi mentioned, does not require a significant amount of nutrition. They don't like a lot of nitrogen, for example. So traditional cover cropping, which we've worked with, hasn't been all that helpful, but they need calcium. So how are you going to get calcium into your soils if you have low calcium? That's just one example. Age to maturity, as Steve talked about, some plants get there much faster than others. Sugar levels, especially if you're growing for spirits. Where your plant's grown. One of the interesting facts that we've encountered is that agave americana, which is very common in California, has naturalized here. It grows all over the state in median, unirrigated median strips. We've got plants from Southern California and transplanted them here in Northern California, and they've not grown that well. So, buying plants from your area tends to have significant advantage. Growing your own and growing from seed also is significantly helpful. What reproductive mechanisms do the plants have? So agave tequilana and many of the angustifolias produce significantly by rhizome, or hijuelo in Spanish. That can be a good thing if you're looking to bulk out your farm. with your own plants, but it can be a bad thing if you need to constantly be clearing them year after year and dealing with them. So you want to, think about that as well. Commercial viability, as I mentioned, some of the angustifolias and tequilana are going to be really desirable from a distilling perspective. They're hard for us to grow, frankly, here in Northern California, and we're focusing on other plants and as well as hybridizing, which Steve talked about. And then finally, varietal certainty. Agaves can hybridize very easily. They do so in nature and they do so under cultivation. And as a result, it can be challenging to be certain that varieties that you think you're getting are exactly what you're getting. And you just want to be aware of that as well. So let's start with some of the varieties that have not done so well for us. Here you have what looks like a very beautiful A. Weberi with fall foliage. In fact, red and yellow are stress indicators. This is a variety that just hasn't done all that well for us. Given the cold and the wet, it's actually a U.S. Domesticate with very, very small marginal teeth because those have been bred out over time, but it hasn't done well. More significantly, Weber Azul, the variety of angustifolia that is used to make tequila in Mexico, it's frankly not a lover of our climate here. We get too much water and too much cold in the winter for it, and it hasn't done well. But if you look behind this plant that is exhibiting significant stress, there is another variety, a variegated variety of tequilana that's doing quite well. So it's a little bit tougher. It is a little bit more cold and wet tolerant. When we had snow in 2022, it died back considerably, but it's survived and is doing better. Moving to plants that have done really well for us, agave salmiana. We have several varieties of salmiana on our farm. These are very large agaves used traditionally in Mexico to make pulque, and also, which is a fermented beverage, and also spirits. Done very well in our clay in particular. It's much more cold tolerant. Agave podatorum, which is used for spirits traditionally in Mexico, has done very well for us. We have a few different varieties of agave durangensis. This variety of angustifolia called YOLO, which has been planted out in the Central Valley considerably. If you're driving up the 5, where 5 years ago you would have seen only nut trees and pomegranates, you're now starting to see some agave in significant numbers, and you will definitely see some YOLO. It grows very well in California in many places. We seem to be just about at the edge of its cold and wet tolerance, but it has grown well for us, and certainly better than many of the other angustifolias. We have a hybrid of agave karwinskii and agave podatorum that is growing incredibly well for us with very, very little input. Agave rudicanta, which we've had on the farm for a few years, growing very well for us. Americana, especially when it has come from our area. We have a number of plants that we've collected from local median strips and public areas, and those have done quite well. Plants that have come from other parts of the state have done less well. Agave maximiliana, which is one that maybe you wouldn't think would do well with our cold and wet, is one that has done quite well for us too. One of the points Steve made, which I want to reiterate, is there is a lot of opportunity to develop plants that work for your site, even if maybe they shouldn't. And here are 2 examples of plants, both agave karwinskii and agave cupreata, that have done well for us in different ways after really struggling. So karwinskii didn't like our cold, didn't like our wet, and we tried planting for 3 years in a row and lost 100% of our plants. In that snow year of 2022, we had an open nursery where plants mostly got covered in a few inches of snow and died. About 20 karwinskii made it through that winter. And all of those plants have subsequently gone out into our fields and have done quite well in our conditions. So growing from seed, having a bunch of genetics, and testing them, over time, they will adapt. Agave cupreata, similarly, we've lost most of our cupreata. We haven't planted it extensively, but we have found that on a few slopes with very sandy soils, which we have in some parts of our farm, it does well, whereas in our clay soils, it just dies. So you're going to want to experiment. And that gets me to the last part of the of my presentation, which is just if you are going to plant agave, you really want to have the mindset of we're in a pioneering phase, we're in an experimentation phase. And what I love about this particular photo here, two small agave podatorums that went in the field last year from the same seed batch, the same mother plant, and similar in shape, totally different in color, despite being about 3 feet apart. So we are in a place where there's so much unknown. You also see one of the plants is starting to put out on the side, on the right side. The blue plant on the right side has a rhizome coming out, a pup, which is very infrequent for these plants. The one on the right doesn't have it. So there is so much still to learn, and that's in significant part because a lot of the indigenous knowledge, certainly out of Mexico, doesn't always apply here. And a lot of the indigenous knowledge in the United States, unfortunately, for reasons both cultural and political, has disappeared or been disappeared. So we are in a place where it is incredibly important, as Steve pointed out, to understand the context, the knowledge. We're pioneers in this sort of modern age of doing it, but there's a lot of knowledge behind us that can be learned, but it can be hard to find. A lot of that knowledge has been lost, sadly. So on our farm, I just mentioned experimentation. We're doing a tremendous amount of experimentation constantly with irrigation, both with the amount of water that we're giving plants and different varieties. In some cases, no water, planting in the fall to capture first rainwater through the winter, planting in the spring, nutrition and microbial supplementation. We're no chemical. We've done a lot of experiments with different types of nutrition, from seashells to Korean natural farming, fermentation techniques. We've done a lot of experiments with ground cover. We tend to try to keep our native ground cover intact. Here in this photo, you can see plants where we have both on the right, left strips in the middle in place while trimming grasses around the agave, although it's growing back because it's spring or it's been a warm winter so far. And then on the far left, we've done no mowing whatsoever. I will say we've gotten somewhat more growth out of the leaving strips intact. And then planting methods, we have found the most success planting flush on slopes, but we've done work with terraces, berms, mounds, rock piles, transplanting methods in terms of when you do it, do you cut the roots, do you leave them on, plant maintenance, seed germination, and pest control. So, in conclusion, what I'd say is, let's see here. In conclusion, what I'd say is, there's considerable opportunity for planting agave. We are certainly still in a pioneering phase for understanding what it means for our particular farms. There is a lot of knowledge out there. It's absolutely worth seeking out, sort of keeping in mind that it may not apply directly to your site. Agave is more challenging to grow than people think, but it is a very robust plant. I mean, what started for us as really an attempt to, in wine country, to think about how our terroir might give rise to plants that could have a specific point of view and could really speak for our farm and our land in terms of their flavors, has grown into a full-blown love affair. These are extraordinary plants that have incredible ecological benefits, and you're really partaking in a relationship between plants and humans that has gone back for tens of thousands of years. It's just very important to understand your goals, understand your site conditions, ensure that your goals match your site conditions, seek out expertise, and have fun, knowing that it's a really exciting time to be doing this. So with that, I will stop, and hopefully I've stayed relatively on time, and we can, I think, get to Q&A.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Adam. There was one question that came in. Maybe you can speak on Adam or Yessica, but the question was, how is all this experimentation financially sustainable for small farms? And are you finding research grants or other assistance to help?
That's a really good question. So I'm happy to take the first swing at it. I will say that it's challenging. The challenging part of it is not so much the experimentation as it is the lack of cash flow until plants reach maturity. So we planted first in 2020. It's now 2026, and we do not yet have any plants that have matured. And every year or so, we say, hey, we think we're going to get it this year, right? So There are grants available. We're in the process of applying for a number of grants. I think the best way to start is ensuring that it's not your sole source of income. And so your farm, whether you're starting with an acre to see how your soils are working, half acre, make sure that you're doing a lot of the testing should be done before you plant at all. We did 2 years of air temperature testing, 2 years of soil testing before we put plants in the ground. It is also true that the market is very uncertain, right? There's so little supply right now, but there's also very little demand on the processing side, and that's going to change very quickly. There's a lot of the supply is growing faster than the production demand is there, so that's going to change the economics. But it requires a lot of creativity, and so on the experimentation side, we tend to do, I mean, a lot of our fertilization and water experiments are dry farming experiments. We do that in sort of small numbers and then apply it to our larger plantings as we see what works and what doesn't. Our greatest cost is pest management and weed management. We do it all by hand. We don't use any spraying, and that's where I think there's also a lot of work to be done on figuring out how to lower those costs for the small farmer.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Adam was saying there that to experiment so much, you're gonna have to find other ways of generating revenue, right? So for instance, on my farm, we are, growing cactus, we're growing, fukurea, we're growing goats and all types of different things that bring in, seasonal and yearly revenue that allows for the agave experimentation, right? So sometimes at the beginning stages of this agave industry, there's going to have to be people that do a lot of this experimentation, and it does carry some risk. But for instance, if you develop products that nobody is really working on, such as today, everybody's focusing on agave, spirits. But if you focus, for instance, on agave, biomedical products or agave fiber or agave, energy, for instance, like biofuels or direct energy production through agave. I mean, who's to say you can't create your own small power plant and completely have vertically integrated agave company that allows you for a lot to do a lot of this experimentation. But the big point there is that you will not be able to experiment if you do not have alternative revenue sources. I think that's pretty much the conclusion there.
Nice. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It's 11 a.m. and we're trying to keep this in time for every other speaker and attendee. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to Adam, Yessica, Steve, and Emma again. Thank you so much for putting this panel together, moderating it. It was amazing to hear about all of your perspectives. As another reminder, this session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube very soon. And my colleague Emma here will be handling follow-up unanswered questions via our internal messaging system. Basically, that means you'll get an email. So thank you so much again for being here. There's many more workshops to come, and we hope to see you around.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.